Jimmy Kimmel's suspension from ABC wasn't just another TV shakeup, it was a cultural earthquake. For more than 2 decades, Jimmy Kimmel Live had been a late-night staple, blending sharp comedy with social critique. But in 2025, one monologue set off a chain reaction that exposed the fragile balance between politics, corporate power, and free expression. What followed was outrage in Hollywood, protests in the streets, panic in Disney's boardrooms, and ultimately, a triumphant rebirth for Kimmel at CBS. This is the story of how one comedian's silencing reshaped late-night television and revealed the true cost of censorship. ABC's Breaking Point. The saga began not with a television joke, but with a national tragedy that left the country shaken. In early September 2025, conservative commentator Charlie Kirk was killed while speaking at a university event in Utah, an act of violence that immediately became the subject of heated political debate. In the days that followed, speculation and anger swirled online, with competing narratives fighting for dominance before the facts were even known. Jimmy Kimmel, host of Jimmy Kimmel Live, for more than 2 decades, chose to address the story head-on in his monologue. Known for mixing humor with pointed political commentary, he criticized the way grief was being politicized and urged the public not to weaponize mourning. To his regular viewers, it was consistent with his style. Part humor, part heartfelt commentary. But in a climate already tense, some interpreted the remarks as insensitive. Conservative media outlets quickly amplified the criticism, framing Kimmel's words as evidence of bias. The Federal Communications Commission added fuel to the fire when officials hinted that ABC affiliates could face scrutiny if they continued to air programming deemed not in the public interest. For affiliate groups pursuing multi-billion-dollar mergers, the prospect of regulatory headaches was intolerable. Within 48 hours, several major affiliates preempted Jimmy Kimmel Live, effectively gutting its national reach before Disney's leadership had even convened to discuss the controversy. What began as a single late-night monologue had become a corporate crisis that tested ABC's resilience and Disney's willingness to defend one of its most recognizable stars. The sudden suspension. The decision to suspend Kimmel was executed with startling speed. Insiders reported that Disney's board met an emergency session after receiving signals from both regulators and advertisers that the fallout was unsustainable. While technically placed on indefinite hiatus, the move was widely understood as a firing in all but name. The announcement landed like a thunderclap. Kimmel had anchored ABC's late-night identity since 2003, outlasting competitors and helping the network remain relevant with younger audiences. Removing him seemed almost unthinkable, yet it was carried out with clinical precision. Executives justified the decision as a necessary measure to protect affiliates and advertisers, citing the intense backlash and threats of regulatory review. But for critics inside and outside the industry, it looked like capitulation to political pressure. Commentators noted the irony that Kimmel, a comedian, was punished not for ratings or misconduct, but for words spoken in satire. Industry veterans immediately recalled past controversies, from the cancellation of Politically Incorrect in the early 2000s to the firing of Roseanne Barr in 2018. Yet the Kimmel case felt different because it involved not only advertiser discomfort, but the shadow of government influence. Disney, long praised for its careful brand management, suddenly looked fragile, willing to sacrifice cultural capital for short-term stability. The speed of the suspension raised broader questions about whether any performer, no matter how established, was safe when politics collided with business interests. It wasn't just a programming decision, it was a precedent that reverberated across Hollywood. Hollywood's outcry. The entertainment community's reaction was swift and visceral. Comedian Wanda Sykes, who had been scheduled to appear on the show the very night it was pulled, arrived at the studio in full makeup only to be told that taping was canceled. Her emotional video from outside the theater went viral within hours, setting the tone for an avalanche of celebrity responses. Ben Stiller posted a simple but powerful message, "This isn't right," while actress Jean Smart warned that satire was being dangerously confused with hate speech. Jamie Lee Curtis expressed solidarity with a photo captioned, "We stand with you," and podcaster Mark Maron released a passionate statement saying the episode represented a real-time erosion of free expression. Professional guilds added their voices, with the Writers Guild of America and the Dramatists Guild both issuing formal condemnations. They framed the suspension not merely as the loss of a host, but as a warning to all creative professionals that their words could be silenced if they displeased powerful interests. Veteran comedians like Jon Stewart and Dave Chappelle weighed in with warnings that political intimidation had entered the bloodstream of entertainment. For Hollywood, the issue went far beyond one program. It touched the very foundation of the industry's identity, the belief that artists must be free to create, comment, and critique without fear of retaliation. The suddenness of Kimmel's removal revealed how fragile that assumption had become, and it galvanized the entertainment community into action. Protests in the streets. By the following morning, the outrage had spilled from studios and social media into the streets. Outside Disney's Burbank headquarters, hundreds of members of SAG-AFTRA, the Writers Guild, and IATSE marched together in a rare show of cross-union solidarity. For an industry often fragmented along craft lines, the image of actors, writers, and technicians marching shoulder to shoulder was powerful. Their handmade signs mixed wit with urgency. Comedy is not a crime. Don't Mickey Mouse the Constitution, and networks shouldn't bow to bullies. The sight of rival guilds united carried symbolic weight, recalling earlier moments when Hollywood had rallied in defense of free expression. Many older marchers compared the energy to the anti-blacklist rallies of the 1950s. Younger protesters drew parallels to the 2017 women's marches or the WGA strikes of 2023, when solidarity had forced studios back to the bargaining table. New York was no quieter. Demonstrators gathered outside ABC's headquarters near Lincoln Square, where the atmosphere mixed defiance with disappointment. Dozens of fans who had flown in from across the country to attend Kimmel's taping joined industry veterans on the picket lines. For them, the cancellation wasn't just about missing a show, it was about losing a nightly ritual that had shaped their cultural lives. "We watch the news, but Jimmy makes sense of it," one fan told a reporter. "It feels like the corporate boardroom just walked into our living room and turned off the TV mid-sentence." That quote ran in the New York Times, crystallizing the sense of betrayal. On social media, the images of comedians and writers marching under the same banner spread rapidly. Clips of the chants, "Satire is survival, in Disney, don't cave," went viral on TikTok and Instagram, where younger audiences who rarely watch linear television nonetheless recognize the stakes. Late-night comedy, dismissed by some as a fading genre, suddenly looked like a front line in a larger cultural struggle. To many, the protests weren't just about one network or one host. They were about whether creative professionals anywhere could trust their voices to survive the collision of politics, regulation, and corporate caution. The symbolism extended beyond Hollywood. Editorials in newspapers across the country linked the protests to a broader climate of anxiety about censorship and political intimidation. Comparisons were drawn to the Pentagon Papers, when the press resisted government pressure, and to the Dixie Chicks controversy of 2003, when a band's critique of the Iraq War led to boycotts. The through line was clear: America's recurring struggle to reconcile dissent with commerce had resurfaced, this time in the form of a late-night comedian. Inside ABC, silence and fear. If the streets were filled with noise, inside ABC the mood was one of silence, confusion, and betrayal. Writers and producers reported learning of the suspension from breaking news alerts rather than internal communication, a detail that deepened their sense of abandonment. Some recalled refreshing their phones in disbelief, only to realize the decision had been finalized without warning. "We found out at the same time as the public," one staffer said anonymously. "That told us everything about where we stand in the corporate food chain." Jimmy Kimmel himself, still under contract through 2026 with a reported $15 million annual salary, was effectively exiled with no clear path to return. His dressing room remained intact, lights off but untouched, a ghostly reminder of what had been erased. In the writer's room, the transformation was immediate. Once a space buzzing with edgy brainstorming, it became cautious and subdued. Writers began trimming political jokes, worried that even mild satire might cross a line. Entire segments were quietly shelved, not because they were offensive, but because no one wanted to risk testing boundaries. Every punchline came with a question mark, one producer explained. You start wondering, who will this upset? Will this be the next monologue that gets someone pulled? Younger staff privately questioned whether their careers could survive such instability. For rising comedy writers, late-night television had long been a launchpad to sitcoms, streaming series, and Hollywood films. But now many worried that the association with a politically sensitive show could brand them as high risk. Veteran employees tried to reassure them, but their own unease was obvious. Some recalled earlier controversies, Roseanne Barr's firing in 2018, Gina Carano's removal from The Mandalorian. But none felt as destabilizing as this. Those cases involved personal misconduct or offensive social media posts. Kimmel's case involved satire, his actual job. That distinction made the chill inside ABC far more pervasive. The removal of such a high-profile, long-tenured figure sent a chilling message that even loyalty and legacy offered no protection. Trust between executives and creative teams, already fragile after years of streaming-era cost-cutting, seemed to fracture overnight. The once collaborative atmosphere now felt cautious, even fearful, as though every joke carried corporate risk. Rumors circulated that executives were reviewing the political tone of other ABC programs, creating a culture where silence seemed the only safe strategy. The effect rippled outward into Disney's other divisions. At Pixar and Marvel, creatives whispered about whether their projects might face scrutiny if political themes offended the wrong audience. At ESPN, on-air talent speculated nervously about whether commentary on social issues would be next. The chilling effect was no longer hypothetical, it was structural. By removing Kimmel so abruptly, ABC had shifted the balance of power inside the company. Executives now dictated not just budgets but the boundaries of expression. For many staffers, that shift felt like a betrayal of the very idea of working in entertainment. Advertisers and market reaction. The emotional toll inside ABC was matched by financial tremors outside it. Advertisers who depend on the stability reacted swiftly to the uncertainty. Several major brands paused their campaigns, while others quietly shifted budgets toward NBC and CBS, both of which positioned themselves as steady hands in the storm. In the advertising world, perception often matters as much as reality. A BC once touted as one of Disney's most reliable assets was suddenly labeled high-risk inventory in media buying circles. The phrase, reported in Ad Age, stung executives who had long sold ABC as a platform of trust and reach. Late-night programming, often overlooked in casual conversation, is in fact a critical gateway to younger audiences, a segment increasingly difficult to capture in the fragmented world of streaming. For advertisers, buying time during Jimmy Kimmel Live meant more than impressions. It meant cultural alignment with a host whose monologues regularly went viral and whose interviews drove online chatter the next morning. The disruption was therefore particularly damaging. By losing Kimmel, ABC lost not just a host, but an ecosystem of audience engagement that extended far beyond the 11:35 p.m. time slot. Wall Street noticed immediately. Disney's stock dropped 2% the day after the suspension. On paper, it was a modest decline, but in context, coming amid ongoing streaming losses, park attendance fluctuations, and a string of underperforming films, the signal was dire. Analysts on CNBC and Bloomberg openly questioned whether ABC had become more liability than asset. A chorus of investors asked whether Disney's long-standing ownership of a broadcast network still made strategic sense in an era when growth was driven by streaming. Some floated the possibility of spinning off ABC entirely, a scenario once unthinkable but now whispered about on trading floors. The advertising industry also reassessed its own assumptions. For years, brand safety had meant avoiding edgy jokes, crude humor, or controversial topics. After Kimmel's suspension, the definition seemed to flip. Marketers began asking whether the bigger risk was not aligning with a provocative comedian, but tying themselves to a corporation perceived as timid. If Disney caves this easily, how can we trust them to stand by us when controversy comes? One marketing executive told Adweek. In trying to insulate itself from political backlash, ABC had inadvertently highlighted the fragility of its own backbone. The ripple effects extended beyond Disney. At NBC, sales executives quietly used the moment to reassure buyers that The Tonight Show under Jimmy Fallon was a safe harbor, free of the volatility now associated with ABC. CBS went further, seizing the opportunity to position itself as the bold alternative. Reports soon emerged of CBS executives negotiating directly with Kimmel, dangling a massive financial package and promising full creative freedom. For CBS, the calculation was simple. Advertisers wanted both stability and cultural relevance, and Kimmel, newly transformed into a symbol of defiance, offered both. For Disney, the irony was cruel. What had been intended as a defensive move to protect affiliates and advertisers instead rattled their confidence. What was meant to shield the company from controversy only drew more attention to its vulnerability. In the boardrooms of Madison Avenue, ABC was no longer discussed as a platform for creative risk, but as a case study in corporate timidity. Rivals seized the opportunity. While ABC stumbled, rivals moved decisively, recognizing that the late-night space was suddenly open terrain. NBC reassured advertisers that The Tonight Show and its other properties remained stable, contrasting its steady hand with ABC's turmoil. Executives placed calls directly to ad agencies, promising smooth sailing and emphasizing Jimmy Fallon's reputation for avoiding politics. Yet while NBC played defense, CBS took the boldest step. Within days, reports surfaced that CBS executives were negotiating directly with Kimmel, offering one of the most lucrative late-night contracts in modern television history. The package, estimated at more than $100 million, was not simply about salary. It included unprecedented creative freedom, production control for his longtime writers, development rights for specials, and guaranteed marketing support across Paramount's broadcast and streaming platforms. For CBS, the hire was framed not just as a business decision, but as a cultural declaration. By positioning itself as the network that would defend satire where Disney had faltered, CBS cast itself as both protector and beneficiary of artistic independence. Leaks from the negotiations suggested that CBS courted Kimmel with promises of zero interference from corporate overseers, a message carefully designed to contrast with Disney's risk-averse culture. The pitch resonated. For Kimmel, the decision to jump to CBS was less about money than about principle. Friends described him as furious but energized, determined to prove that his voice could survive outside the Disney machine. For CBS, it was an opportunity to reinvigorate its late-night lineup, long seen as lagging behind NBC and ABC. The strategy worked even before Kimmel's debut. The narrative had already shifted. CBS was cast as the bold risk-taker, Disney as the risk-averse giant, and NBC as the safe but unremarkable middle ground. Trade headlines like "CBS bets big on free speech" and "Disney's loss becomes Paramount's gain" reinforced the perception that a generational realignment in late night was underway. The triumphant return, Kimmel's premiere on CBS, was staged like a cultural coronation, orchestrated with the precision of a Super Bowl halftime show. Promotional campaigns blanketed Paramount's broadcast and streaming platforms, while cross-promotion on Comedy Central, MTV, and Paramount Plus targeted younger audiences who had long since abandoned network television. Billboards in Los Angeles and New York declared, "He's back and he's free." The debut episode opened not with sketches or celebrity guests, but with a direct address. Looking into the camera, Kimmel said, "After 20 years, my family traded me for political cover. At CBS, I finally get to speak freely." The line ricocheted across social media within minutes, clipped and shared millions of times by morning. Ratings surged, with viewership more than tripling CBS's usual late-night numbers. Streaming simulcasts brought in younger demographics that had largely tuned out of traditional TV. Analysts described the launch as a lightning strike in a sector many had assumed was in terminal decline. Critics in major newspapers praised the symbolism as much as the comedy, calling the episode a declaration of independence for late night. Beyond numbers, the symbolism mattered deeply. A comedian silenced by one corporate giant had been elevated by another, transforming from late-night host to cultural symbol almost overnight. Audience reactions echoed that sense of vindication. Fans outside the Ed Sullivan Theater held homemade signs reading, "Free at last," and "Disney's lost our gain." CBS executives capitalized on the moment, launching podcasts, streaming shorts, and behind-the-scenes documentaries that expanded Kimmel's reach beyond the nightly broadcast. Internationally, syndication deals packaged him as the host Disney couldn't control, giving CBS unexpected global leverage. For CBS, it was a masterstroke that redefined its identity. For ABC, it was a humiliation that underscored how quickly cultural capital can shift. And for the industry, it was proof that satire could still thrive if given the room to breathe. A cultural reckoning beyond contracts and ratings, Kimmel's saga forced America to confront deeper contradictions about speech, accountability, and the role of comedy in a polarized society. To some, his suspension represented necessary responsibility for careless words, a reminder that even entertainers with massive platforms must weigh the impact of their remarks. To others, it was censorship in plain sight, evidence that political power could silence dissent when combined with corporate timidity. The truth was more complex. Both left and right had at times embraced cancellation when it suited their purposes, only to decry it when used against them. Kimmel's story exposed the partisan nature of free speech debates in America. Industry guilds, including the Writers Guild of America and SAG-AFTRA, issued statements condemning the silencing, while conservative commentators called the suspension overdue accountability. This clash revealed a disturbing reality. The conversation about free speech was less about principle than about whose ox was being gored. Yet Kimmel's resurgence at CBS suggested something hopeful, that when one institution silences a voice, another can amplify it. His show became not just entertainment, but a cultural mirror, reflecting society's divisions and hypocrisies in ways news often could not. Clips from his monologues dominated online feeds, drawing millions of views within hours. References to his commentary appeared in congressional hearings, advocacy campaigns, and even classroom discussions in media studies programs. Professors described the saga as a living case study in the tension between corporate branding and constitutional freedoms. In Hollywood, comedians reported feeling both inspired and intimidated. Inspired by Kimmel's defiance, intimidated by the reminder of how vulnerable they remained to corporate pressure. The debate about Kimmel became, in effect, a debate about America itself, about who gets to speak, who decides the limits, and what price corporations are willing to pay to defend or surrender artistic independence. The future of late night. Year later, the impact of Kimmel's firing and rebirth was undeniable. ABC, once a powerhouse in late night, had lost its footing entirely. Attempts to reboot the time slot with rotating hosts faltered, mocked in the press as a carousel of caution. Advertisers continued to drift towards CBS, which had successfully branded itself as the network of boldness. NBC remained steady but increasingly faced pressure to innovate, especially as Kimmel's CBS clips dominated digital platforms where Fallon's lighter style rarely went viral. Meanwhile, streaming platforms began experimenting with live topical programming, inspired by CBS's success in turning late night into a cultural event once again. Netflix tested weekly live comedy specials, Amazon experimented with hybrid talk shows blending politics and satire, and YouTube creators leaned into sharper, news-adjacent comedy formats. The rules of the genre had changed. No longer could networks rely on safety and predictability. Audiences demanded authenticity, even if it came with risk. For advertisers, the lesson was clear. Controversy might scare executives, but audiences crave voices unafraid to challenge power. For Jimmy Kimmel, the ordeal transformed him from late-night comedian to cultural symbol, a man whose very presence on screen reminded viewers of what was at stake in debates over speech. For ABC, it marked a decline that may take years to repair, if it is ever repaired at all. And for America, it was a reminder that even laughter is contested ground in an age when politics, commerce, and culture collide. The next decade of late night will be written not by those who play it safe, but by those willing to risk discomfort for authenticity. Kimmel's journey, from suspension to resurrection, stands as proof that satire can survive. but only when institutions have the courage to defend it.